And whatever is saved, the government is borrowing. Either the government is spending it directly, or they're guaranteeing a mortgage debt, or they're guaranteeing a student loan. There is nothing left. And the economy is never going to recover. The unemployment rate is going to keep getting worse because businesses are going to keep being destroyed. Because we have to destroy businesses to support the growth of government. Government is growing dramatically. And so in order to grow government, we have to shrink the private sector. Because the resources propping up the government are being taken from the private sector. But the stronger problem is, the smaller the private sector becomes, the harder it is to support the public sector. Because the people working for government, they're not putting into the pot. They're taking out of the pot. They only have jobs because private citizens are productive and supported. So we need to elect somebody into the Senate right now that understands the severity of these problems and that is willing to deal with them. I don't think that there are any professional politicians. You know, I've never run for anything. I've never held elected office. And the reason I'm running now is not because I want to be a United States Senator. I have a good job. I'm perfectly happy as a private citizen. The problem is the professional politicians have brought this economy to the brink of ruin. And I know what needs to be done to stop that, and I'm willing to do it because I don't care if I get reelected. Once I'm in office, I figure 6 years is plenty of time. If I can't help straighten out this mess in 6 years, it's not going to happen. We don't even have 6 years. We need to address these problems now. 6 more years of this kind of runaway deficit spending, we're not going to survive it. So we need to have somebody in the Senate right now who is going to basically lead a revolution in the Republicans and the Democrats and get them to understand what they've done to this country and that they need to put the national interest above their political interest. We can't just freeze spending on 20% of the budget a year from now. We need to take an axe to the budget right now. We need to slash government spending. The government is broke. There is no money. People who are getting checks from the government have to be told they're going to get smaller checks. There's just no way around it. Because if we don't level with them and tell them the truth, then what they get from the government is going to have no value because we're going to destroy the currency. Then it's not going to matter if you still get a Social Security check because you're not going to go buy anything because prices are going to go through the roof and everybody is going to be broke. So I want to go there and actually do. You know, a lot of people who have run, you know, for office as Republican, they promise a lot of stuff. They promise they're going to shrink government, but they never do it. You know, at least the Democrats, you know what you get. They run for office and they promise more government, and they keep their word. But the Republicans, the minute they're in office, they act like Democrats. The only time they say something that's right is when they're not in power, like now. There are a lot of Republicans who are saying the right thing now. Where were they a few years ago when Bush was in charge? When he was bailing everybody out and trying to stimulate the economy with deficit spending, why didn't they say something then? You know, they're talking now because they know they're not going to do anything. But the minute they get power, if the Republicans get back in power, what are they going to do? They're going to do what they did last time they had the majority. They're going to run up the deficit even more. They're going to keep spending. Somebody needs to go there and actually remind them of why they were elected and what the principles are. And I think I've got a lot of credibility in this respect. I mean, you got a lot of people in Washington who have never been right. That, you got guys like Ben Bernanke and Timothy Geithner that have a long track record of being wrong on everything. Yet these are the guys that we're following. I've got a long track record of being right. I was warning about the stock market bubble, and I was right. I was warning about the housing bubble. I was warning about the financial crisis. I was doing what I could to prepare my clients to withstand all the foolish policies coming out of Washington. I understand these policies. I understand how they're undermining our economy. I understand how they're undermining our currency. You know, in my business, I help people invest money. I invest money around the world. And I'm constantly trying to figure out where I can put money. What countries are treating capital the best? Where can I get the best return? Unfortunately, I can't get a good return in America because of the policies that are coming out of Washington. I need to go there and change those policies. We're destroying savings. We're destroying capital. We're chasing out of the country. Interest rates are zero. Nobody's gonna save any money when interest rates are zero. And if you don't have savings, you don't have capital. You don't have economic growth. You don't have jobs. You know, the president has, he has this, I know I'll stop and I'll take your question. The president's got, his plan now. He wants to create jobs. Somebody wants a jobs bill. We're not going to get jobs by passing bills. What we need, we don't need to pass any more bills. We've been passing bills for hundreds of years, and look where we are. We need to start repealing bills, repealing legislation. I mean, people are saying that, I don't have any experience as a legislator. Well, the only thing I want to do is repeal stuff. And unfortunately, nobody in office has any experience doing that because nothing ever gets repealed. All they do is pass new bills. I want to remove all the legislation that's been enacted over the years that has distorted our economy, that has burdened our economy, that has destroyed our productivity and our productivity and put us into this mess. That would be a real economic stimulus. And people in government have to realize where jobs come from. I mean, I know where they come from because I have 100 people working for me. And they don't work for me because I'm a humanitarian. They don't work for me because I just want to give away jobs. They work for me because I'm trying to make a profit. And the harder the government makes it for entrepreneurs to make a profit, the fewer people they're going to hire. And the only reason I can hire people is because I have capital. Because if I didn't have any capital, nobody would work for me. They'd work for themselves. So in order to have jobs, you need somebody who can make a profit, and he has to have capital. And the government is making it harder for businesses to make a profit, and they're destroying capital. And so that's why the jobs are disappearing. And they're never going to come back until we change these policies. And what my commitment is that if you elect me as United States Senator, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going there. I'm not going to check my principles at the door if I get elected, which is what most Republicans do. I'm not interrupting my business and spending all this time running for Senate because just so I can be there and go along. I want to change what's happening in the Senate. I want meaningful change. I want to try to lead a revolution in the Republican Party and get them to actually do something instead of just talking about doing something, and get them to understand that we don't have a lot of time, that we've got to do stuff and we've got to do it right now. Anyway, I'd be happy to take any questions about where I stand on any particular policy issue. Yeah.
Combination question. Answer it any way you want. Okay, right now, unless I'm wrong, I think we got off the gold standard in '78. I think China currently owns most of the gold in the world, buying it. They actually own most of our country right now. Part of the question was how would you get our country back from China? When it comes to the thing that Fannie Mae, basically the government, the Obama group calls it a capitalist group, that BS, because it's backed by the government. How would you, I like what you said.
I mean, first of all, with respect, look, we went off the gold standard in 1971. America still has the most gold. China doesn't have that much gold, but you know what? They're going to buy it. China is now the largest producer of gold in the world. They actually outpassed South Africa as the world's largest producer of gold. But China's reserves, they have about $2.5 trillion in foreign currency reserves. And only about 3% of those reserves are in gold. Right? That is going to change. They're going to start buying gold and dumping dollars. The problem is we've been living off of China. China has been the single biggest prop for the American economy. China supplies us with goods that we don't produce and then lends us the money to buy it. And we're completely dependent on China. The problem is one day they're going to pull the plug because it's not in their interest to support American consumption. But they're kind of like, they're like pushing drugs on us and we're taking it. The best thing that China can do for us is to stop supplying us with the credit and force our politicians to act responsibly. Right now they don't have to. They know they can run the deficits because the buddies in China are going to buy the bonds. And if the Chinese don't do it, now Ben Bernanke is going to do it. But your point on Freddie and Fannie is true. I forecasted back in 2004, 2005 that Freddie and Fannie would go bankrupt. I knew for sure they had no chance of surviving. And the reason I knew they would go bankrupt is because I knew that they were guaranteeing mortgages that people weren't going to repay. And I knew that they had very little capital. But the only reason that Fannie and Freddie were able to guarantee trillions of dollars in mortgages, Fannie and Freddie were the most leveraged institutions in the history of the world. You talk about all the leverage as some of the investment banks. I mean, that's nothing compared to what was going on at Freddie and Fannie. And the reason that Freddie and Fannie were able to go so deep into debt is because the government stood behind their obligations. That was the problem. If there was a free market, they never could have gotten that big. It was only with government protection. If the government had stayed out, we never would have had a housing bubble. It was the government fed it. And now the politicians are trying to pretend that the collapse was the result of a failure of capitalism. It wasn't. Right? If it was a failure of capitalism, why didn't people predict it a few years ago? When I predicted it, and I predicted it in specific and precise detail from top to bottom, right? And you can read it through in my books, the stuff that I was saying. I didn't leave anything out. The reason I knew what was going to happen is because I understood the effects of government policy. I understood the moral hazard caused by government regulation. And I understood the unseen consequences of what they were doing. I understood the problems of keeping interest rates too low and how that was distorting decision-making and risk-taking. I mean, Bush talked about the fact that Wall Street got drunk, right? But I knew they were drunk, but they were drunk on government alcohol. If the government hadn't, fed them all that booze, they wouldn't have been drunk and they wouldn't have done those stupid things.